This is from Brené Brown. I wish there was a secret handshake for the Wild Heart Club. I know what it means to stand alone and brave the criticism, fear, and hurt. I know the freedom of belonging everywhere and nowhere at all. Let's sit with that for a moment. That's definitely one of the things I admire about Brené Brown. She doesn't go along with things she doesn't believe in. She speaks out. I know the freedom of belonging everywhere and nowhere at all. Sometimes when we look at people like that, like Brené Brown or different people that we admire for their courage and their authenticity, it seems like they have it all together and it must be really easy. I think that's one thing that we've really learned from listening to podcasts from people and other ways too, really seeing that it's not necessarily easy and it's worth it. So the way I see the journey of healing trauma in one sense, there's a somewhat linear progression, not entirely that, but we start by being really dysregulated. And when we've had childhood trauma in particular, our neural networks are more geared for safety than for connection. As an adult, we start to lean into that and notice the cost that we pay. And many of us are doing practices like these, like somatic mindfulness, inquiry. Many of us have also done many forms of therapy, talk therapy, and other forms. And we're gradually peeling away some of those layers of disconnect and coming more into our true self. And it's exciting to live in that way. And I know for myself, I made a big change when I was just about 60. I left a long term relationship. And some of the people that I told about that are just like, are you kidding me? Like, basically, you're too old to make a change like that. Or why bother? You're going to be dead soon anyway, some variation of that. And yet, it's the best thing I ever did. There were so many things in that relationship that were not working. And 11 and a half years now since I did that. And since in that time, I've really noticed that there's a lot less trauma. I was able to work through a lot of the trauma, some of it relating to her, some of it not. But I also just feel so much more in connection and so much more alive. And I'm able to have more courage and vulnerability and authenticity because I can afford to do that now. And I think for all of us here, we're at a point where we're healed enough that we can really see, I don't want to pay the price for that anymore. I really have a sense that I can lean into that and heal it. It's a wonderful place to be. This quote, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution, is from like over 100 years ago with Emma Goldman. And I remember hearing that and being exposed to that in the feminist movement in the 70s and 80s. And what is it that we're doing all of this work for if it's not to have a joyous life, if it's not to have happiness and peace? And one of the things that Brené talks about is having this wild heart doesn't mean that we ignore everybody else or that we stop fighting for justice, and that we don't put our own life and our own joy too far to the side either, that we need to integrate that as well. We need to heal, and we don't have to wait until we're fully healed. So, what we do as a practice of healing, especially turning into joy and excitement and juiciness and alignment in our life, is part of our healing, it's part of the practice. And as we feel more alive, we're less tired, we're less disconnected, we have more connection with ourselves and with others. And that also inspires us to move more and share more and be more vulnerable. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are, it requires you to be who you are. Let's sit with that for a moment. So, fitting in is a strategy for social inclusion. It has a huge price. It's trying to belong somewhere that we want to be, but they don't care if we're there. And we have to do something about ourselves in order to fit in. We have to hide some parts or bring some parts forward or something about it. But belonging is where we want to be there and they want us there. We don't have to change who we are to be there. Bring yourself into presence. Ground somatically. Notice your feet, your seat. Notice the present moment. You could look around the room, you could hold your own hands, all of these grounding tools that we have. Become aware of your breath. What comes up for you when you tune into your wild heart? Or it's just those words, wild, might feel out of control. It might be exhilarating. There's so many different responses we might have to that. We're just exploring. There's no right or wrong answer. Let's start with noticing a situation where you felt like you had to hide part of who you are in order to fit in. We'll take a minute with that. Notice your breath. Notice what comes to mind. Notice the images, the thoughts in your mind, the circumstance. Who was it? What was the situation? If you bring it to life in your mind through words, images, memories, notice as well what happens in your body. Is there heaviness? Did your breath change? And then set that aside and now bring to mind a time when you felt like you really belonged. So it might be that we belong to ourselves, it might be that we belonged with others. If you can think of a time where you felt pretty relaxed, and this isn't a perfection thing, we don't have to feel 100%, but where you felt pretty confident that the people that you wanted to be with also wanted to be with you. And what is your visual of that? What's the memory, the emotion? Let that come to life in your mind. You feel safe to be who you are. You don't have to hide part of yourself. And notice that in your body. And it might not be 100%. It might be, oh, I feel sad. I don't have that much of that in my life. Or, man, that was a long time ago. So it might be all kinds of things are coming up. Let's just stay with that for a couple minutes. You know who you are. You can express who you are. You're not worried about, oh, I better not tell them that or whatever it might be. And stay as a witness to your thoughts, your body, your breath. And this thing about the wilderness, so we're not fitting into a bland situation. We're fitting in with people or in a situation where we feel alive. We're interested, we're engaged. And as you're doing that, we'll do that for another minute or two just to stay really aware of your response to this. And then let's move to the next part of this. The true belonging, this is again from Brené Brown. is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your more authentic self with the world. So, this is something that then becomes natural to us. So, really, the first part of this is, what part of my wild heart do I hide from myself? And again, what do you notice? What's the first thing that comes into your mind? Highly related with shame, with feelings of being excluded for some. If we shared something about ourselves and we were excluded, we're going to have that. And we might have gone all the way along that road of, I'm okay with other people not accepting me, and I fully accept myself. There's probably at least a lot of what we might not share with others, we're okay with within ourselves. We're not shaming ourselves. We actually value that. But if there's anything that comes up, notice that. Why do I hide that from myself? Is it necessary? Could I move closer with a practice of compassion? And you can move between that and, what part of your wild heart do you hide from others? We have so many habitual responses. We've been shot down or made fun of, and then we just stopped sharing who we are. And let yourself feel into that a little bit. Is there a circumstance, a group, a person where you feel like now might be the perfect time to move a little bit closer and be a little bit more authentic with that person? It might be somebody that is kind of a bully and talks over you all the time. It might be someone who has very different ideas about some things than you do, and you don't usually challenge them because you know it's not going to be much use. And maybe this time you thought, I'm actually going to speak up next time. There's so many things this could be. So, what comes up for you? We'll take a few minutes here as well. What part of my wild heart do I have hidden from others? And if it's not as necessary as it once was, like, we have to be careful here not to shame ourselves. There's always reasons. If we're not completely open with someone, and it might still be like, oh, yeah, I'm never going there with that person. But to take a minimal risk, a low to medium risk, what's your sense if I was to reach out to that person and say, hey, do you want to get together and get to know each other a little bit? I feel like I'd like to be friends. What does that feel like? And as you're feeling into that or sensing into that, how does it come with your strong back, your soft front? How does that relate? Is there something you would need to strengthen? Maybe strengthen a boundary, or maybe kind of acknowledge that you might not be met with approval if you speak up in a certain situation. You could strengthen your back. You might be noticing that you've hardened your front with somebody. If you're going to share with them, it's going to be a bit of a risk. You're going to have a bit of a softer front. How does that play into what you're working with? And then over the next minute or so, bring that to a close. Notice your body, notice your breath. Of course, you're not in that situation right at the moment, so you have time to sit with this a little bit longer, to really feel into what is it that scares me about that? What is it that excites me? Is this a risk I want to take right now, maybe later? There's no right or wrong here. We're just looking at the cost of not showing up with our wild heart. We get deadened after a while. So, what are the circumstances where we could push it a little bit and then maybe a little more? How would that feel in our life? And give yourself some connection, some support. If you want, you could put your hand on your heart. It takes courage to share who we are with the world and to do it in a way that's safe enough and not overprotecting ourselves. This is something that we can work with on an ongoing basis for sure.